First of all, Tavis, I want to thank you for being here with us in New Orleans and at Dillard University. You're not a stranger to Dillard because when I first got here, you and Dr. West came. I had just gotten here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something special for King Week, and y'all had the new book out, and I was like, we're going to bring Tavis and Dr. West, and people was just like, oh, I don't know if they'll come for that. And it was 800 people in the chat. So that was good. But, you know, part of it is, you know, as I told you when I was at Philander Smith, I started this lecture series, and the inspiration was the town halls that you did starting in 2000, where I'm watching black folks sit all day long in these churches to have these conversations. And I was like, man, we could do something like this. And so we started it at Philander. We do a same kind of thing here. And so the question is, you know, what was your idea about creating that kind of space? And what did you hope would happen when you were doing the State of the Black Union for that decade?
It's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me back at Dillard. It's an honor to be here anywhere where you are, so thank you for the invitation. With regard to your question, the framing on this is really important because I think for a lot of black folks, certainly for the young folk on the campus here at Dillard, there's like, it's not, you know, it's not BC and AD, it's, you know, before Barack and after Barack. That's how time is sort of divided. So so you have to understand that this was well before the country had ever heard of Barack Hussein Obama. And so Obama was not on the stage. There was no black blogosphere. Tom Joyner was the only person who was syndicated in black radio. This is pre-Steve Harvey, pre-Russ Parr, pre-Ricky Smiley, pre-all that. Tom Joyner was the only game in town on radio nationally, and BET was the only game in town on television nationally. I had the honor, the distinction of being the only person on both of those platforms. I was on Tom Joyner by morning doing commentary, on BET at night hosting my own talk show. And so it occurred to me in that space that while I was talking to black folk every night and every morning, and while black folk were having a conversation every night and every morning, 7 million on radio and higher some days, you know, millions watching BET, of course, but this conversation wasn't getting out into the society writ large. And so how do we take this conversation? How do I take all this brilliance, all this excellence that I'm exposed to every day in these mediums and let all the fellow citizens in this country get exposed to that? And it just seemed to me quickly that there ought to be at least one day a year, just one day, where we could bring the brain trust of black America together and let everybody else in on this conversation. So essentially give white folk a window to black intelligentsia, a window to black America. And so that's where the idea came from. And I was fortunate that every year C-SPAN agreed to cover it. And so you're right, people would literally sit all day long. There's a morning panel of 12 great minds, an afternoon panel. We'd break literally for an hour and a half for lunch. People at home, you could see them running to the kitchen, going out to get some lunch, going to the cleaners, and they would get right back 90 minutes later for the second panel. And both panels were just star-studded with brilliant voices over the years. And so those were great days. We did that for a dozen years. And sometimes I think about the letters that I receive from people every year. I mean, I would get letters from, I have a letter from Senator, the late, great Senator Ted Kennedy. I got letters from Barry Gordy. I got Prince would call me every year. I mean, Prince and I became good friends, but Prince would literally watch this thing every year and call me. And if it were anywhere near LA, he'd say, when the thing's over, man, why don't you bring 2 or 3 panelists to my house? So we'd go to Prince's house, either in Minneapolis or in LA, a day or two, if not the same night of the panel, and we would sit around for hours all night at Prince's table just talking about these issues because he was so hungry and so thirsty. So there's just a broad range of people that were exposed to that. But the short answer is, which wasn't so short, obviously, the short answer is I wanted white folk. I wanted all of our fellow citizens in white America to see just one day all the brilliance that I was seeing throughout the year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I count myself as a part of that group that would text every now and then, like, when you gonna bring it back?
Yeah.
So, you know, I always wanted to come
and
back.
I appreciate your text, man.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you're doing one that becomes more personal.
Sure.
So how do you make the decision now to say, I mean, I've done this before, I'm comfortable, but now I want to facilitate a conversation where I have been associated with a topic, and you've never been afraid to deal with tough topics. I mean, even when you had town halls and you dealt with some of the issues in the black church, I mean, they went there, they dealt with real issues. So this isn't new, but how do you frame it for yourself to say, I want to address this topic even though it's related to me and people are feeling some kind of way about this topic, and even maybe me at this time?
You're right, it is not new, but it's different. I started this tour in my hometown of LA. And I didn't know how I was going to feel walking on the stage, how the audience was going to feel seeing me walk on the stage. because this is a very, I have a personal connection to this story. So when PBS made this announcement, some weeks ago, that they were suspending my show indefinitely, pulling the plug on distribution because of these random accusations and allegations, I responded immediately. And my response essentially was, I have not done anything of which I am ashamed, number one. Number two, I have never groped, I've never coerced, I've never exposed myself. The only relationships I've ever had in my life fit into one category, consensual. My mom and daddy didn't raise me any other way. I'm not married, I don't have any kids, I've never had anything but consensual relationships. So when I was being hit from out of the blue with these allegations, that's just not true to who I am, to who Joyce and Emery raised. It's not my character. So I did what I always do. I responded immediately, and I told the truth. And I said up front that my very first public statement about this was, if having a consensual relationship with a colleague over a 30-year career is a crime, then I'm guilty. But we need to have a conversation about this. We need to have a conversation about where the lines are with regard to women and men in the workplace. The reality is this. You can make Tavis Smiley the poster child for this issue right now, and clearly I am. But at the end of the day, we meet at work, and stuff happens. Bill and Melinda Gates met at work, and he was the boss. Jeff Bezos at Amazon met his wife at work. He clearly is the boss. Henry Kissinger met his wife at work. Henry Kissinger was the boss. We see Mika and Joe on MSNBC every morning. We know where they met, and it's on television for us to see every day. Barack and Michelle Obama met in the law office. She was the senior person, he was the junior person. So the point is that it happens. So we can put our heads in the sand, you can make Tavis Smiley the poster child, the boogeyman, but this is our reality. Americans are forced to work longer and longer hours at work. We spend more of our time at work than we spend any place else, as we all know. So my point is, it's a reality, stuff happens. The question then is, how do you deal with it? So one, do you conflate a consensual relationship with sexual assault, with sexual misconduct, with rape? I don't think you can conflate those two things. You can't conflate and you can't demonize a consenting relationship between two adults. So one, why are we conflating these things? I am not Harvey Weinstein. I am not Kevin Spacey. I am not Matt Lauer. Don't conflate these things, number one. But number two, even if you think that what I did was a mistake in judgment over 30 years as a single man dating a couple people that I worked with, even if you think that was a mistake, does it rise to the level of termination and this kind of public shaming? Right. And as black men, we know that we always get the worst end of this accusatory stick. That black men historically have been accused of doing all kinds of things, have been vilified. We know the story of Emmett Till for allegedly whistling at a white woman. So we have a historical reference here for how they use these kinds of so-called investigations to come at us. And so the final point is this, that if our country is about anything, Dr. Kimbrough, it's about the presumption of innocence and due process. I've been afforded neither. I sit here right now with you weeks, 2 months basically after all this started. I still don't know who the accusers were or are. I don't know anything about these allegations. I don't know anything. You know more about my case or as much about my case as I do. I just don't. That's my point. I don't know anything. So when you've been dragged through the mud, you've been publicly shamed, and you don't know why it even happened, again, you can make me the poster child. You can point the finger at Tavis and say you shouldn't have had a relationship in the workplace. Okay, well, a whole bunch of us do. So let's figure out where the lines are, number one. But again, at the end of the day, today it's me, but tomorrow it's your husband, or it's your brother, or it's your son, or your nephew, or your uncle. And then when something they've done that wasn't a crime, 30 years in their past, comes back to bite them in the behind, we're going to see how you feel. Right. So it's just a tough spot to be in. So what do? You speak up immediately, and you defend yourself defiantly. Secondly, you get busy accepting the opportunities, and here's where God is good all the time. Literally, the day after this story broke, major companies started calling me saying, well, we want to do business with you. So literally, 3 weeks after this happened, we announced multiple deals on multiple new platforms, including a brand new television show starting in April. So as Kendrick would say, we're going to be all right. So we bounced back, literally, we got up off the canvas, bounced back 3 weeks later. After I responded and then to the allegations, and then we bounced back with these new deals, the next thing was for me to keep my word from day one that we need to talk about this. And here's the bottom line. Everybody's been talking about the fact that we need to talk about this, but ain't nobody set up no situation. There is no town hall. There is no town hall tour that allows for a democratic space to be created for a free and open dialogue for everyday people in New Orleans and beyond to come out and to have a conversation. And so I just tried to keep my word and try to be transparent. I see you have in your lap here one of my books. I'm the only person I know in my business who's written not one, but 2 and 3, if you count the memoir. Yeah. I've written at least 3 books about my failings, about the mistakes I've made, about the lessons I've learned. You will not find anybody in our business who's been more transparent than I have been about my life. Because I want to help young brothers. I want to help young sisters. These are the mistakes I've made. These are the lessons I've learned. Take it from me. Try to do better. My grandmother said, when you know better, you ought to do better. So I've tried to be transparent. That does not make me, how can I put it? I'm not a perfect servant. I'm just a public servant. Mm-hmm. Dave Chappelle, I was watching his Netflix comedy special, which is brilliant. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Yeah. But he uses that phrase, imperfect allies. There are many of us men who are imperfect allies to the women in this Me Too movement, to the women in this Time's Up campaign. Many of us are imperfect allies. But if you're looking for perfect allies, only men who've never made a mistake, men who've never done anything wrong, right. Men who Jesus is the only person I know that ain't never made a mistake. Right. So you have to have imperfect allies. And if you're going to start crushing everybody who wants to be an ally, if you're going to crush me for wanting to have a town hall where all of us can come together, then you're entitled to do that, or you're entitled just not to come to the town hall at Dillard. Right. But I just think we got to be careful about crushing people whose intentions are to try to be allies in giving women the respect that they deserve.
Right. So, I mean, you answered part of what I was going to go with next, because thinking about the Fail Up book, what I know for sure, even though I really like the King book a lot too. Yeah. But I mean,
that's my favorite too.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, in this book, you published the letter from BET when you got fired. So I'm like, how do you? And you mentioned this as someone who has talked openly about a lot of failings and challenges, but you've been very transparent and put things in writing that most critics won't ever do. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like you're being judged differently than other people to say, well, I'm going to be harder on Tavis? And I don't know if this sort of carries over to people still feeling some kind of way about, well, Tavis was hard on Obama, so we still got to axe the grind with him. Do you feel like that's a carryover? Because in terms of transparency, very few people who are critical will put things in writing that you have put. I mean, this is laid out.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been reminded over the last few weeks a number of times by my mother, my family members, my friends, even by strangers who remember this, that I got fired by BET 15 years ago. The circumstances were different, but it was still a very public firing. It was an attempt to publicly shame me. And in something that has gone down in the history books, I mean, Bob Johnson, who was the founder of BET, is still to this day the only CEO and chairman of a company I've ever heard of who fired an employee but felt the need to go on television for an hour live and explain why he fired that employee. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Ted Turner, or can you imagine Bob Iger at Disney? Can you imagine Bill Gates at Microsoft or Jeff Bezos going on TV for an hour to explain why they fired somebody? The pushback that Bob Johnson received was so extreme from black people, so aggressive, that he felt that he had to go on TV for an hour to explain, let me tell you why I fired Tavis. And it still didn't make any sense to anybody. But here's the point that people remind me of. When I got fired by BT 15 years ago, what came of that, interestingly, were all the opportunities I've enjoyed for the last 15 years. Hours after I got fired from BT, these are the offers that came to me. ABC, CNN, NPR, which eventually led to PBS. I got my own book imprint, Smiley Books, on which these books, the imprint on which these books are printed. All of that came after I got fired. So I wouldn't recommend being fired to nobody. Right. But if you're going to get fired and you're going to blow up every time you get fired, get fired. Right. So I don't know what's going to happen in the aftermath of this PBS thing. What I know, as I said earlier, is that a number of companies showed up immediately, 4 or 5 to be exact, who offered me deals, and we worked those deals out and made that announcement, again, 3 weeks after this happened. So I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And I'm very, very confident that things are going to work out, for me in the long run. But in terms of being transparent, it's just my way. I've just never tried to, I don't think everything I do is the public's business. Right. But I do believe that each of us doesn't just have a story, each of us is a story. You are a story. And I'm inspired by your story, the story of your wife, and what you do together as a team. And that's why I love and respect you two so much, because every one of us, again, doesn't just have a story, we are a story. And our story is being written for us to share. There are people who are empowered, who are inspired, who are motivated, who are encouraged, who are uplifted, who have their assumptions re-examined, whose inventory of ideas is expanded, whose prism on the world is made different when they get a chance to learn from your story. Right. And so I just believe that, all of my life that my role is to try to tell the story that I can tell, and hopefully somebody can be empowered in the process. So it's never been really, I've never felt funny, being so open and so transparent. I will tell you in this particular instance, there is a level of humility, there's a level of embarrassment, when people are trying to publicly shame you. Because at the end of the day, I'm a private person. I can tell you this, you will not Google my name any day and see a bunch of photos of me and girlfriends running around here and on the red carpet at this. I've just never done that. I am a very private person. So, the devil knows he knows our Achilles heel. Mm-hmm. And the thing that is been the most humbling for me is having people discussing my private life, my private business, and trying to figure out who I've dated and what I did and what I didn't do. That's nobody's business. That's not your life ain't my business and mine ain't yours, and that's just the world we live in. People love that kind of gossipy space. They love to occupy that space. So that part's been really, really tough. But being transparent about my truth, all right? If you walk in truth and you live in truth, that's the easiest thing to be transparent about.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you one other thing and then get a final comment. So we're in a space, particularly on college campuses, is that you have lots of folks who don't want to have certain conversations. And so we've seen a rise of protests on campus. You see the heckler's veto. If it's not the perfect person at the perfect time, we don't want to have that conversation. For me, I've always pushed back on that because I want to hear a variety of voices. I mean, I've hosted the likes of an Ann Coulter and people on the Ward Connolly that in. And so just a range of people and not just people who make us feel good. And you talk a lot about that in terms of having the democratic space to have those kind of tough conversations. How do we go forward? What would you tell my colleagues, college presidents, about the importance of us being those neutral sort of spaces to have community conversations? Because they're scared. Nobody wants to have these conversations now. What would you tell us about what our role is in creating that kind of space?
Yeah. I'm with you. I've never believed in shutting down conversation. I never believed in shutting down speech. I will certainly challenge speech. And I've done that, as you said earlier, I've done that with Bill Clinton. I've done it with George Bush. I did it with Barack Obama, and some black folk didn't like that. But my thing again is you have to hold people accountable. And I think there's an honor in being held accountable. Nobody wants to be in a relationship where ain't nobody, pardon my English, being held accountable. You don't want to be married to a woman who doesn't hold you accountable. You certainly want to hold her accountable. Your kids are being held accountable to a standard. Nobody wants to be in any relationship where there's no accountability. So I think there's an honor, one, in being held accountable. And I think that when you are challenged to re-examine your own assumptions, one or two things happens. Either you realize there's another way to see the problem or to see the world, or you become stronger in your conviction about what you believe. Every one of your students, everybody watching this, every human being, I argue in one of my books, has to have a mission statement for your life. Every organization has a mission statement. Every college has a mission statement. Every entity has a mission statement. We're the only people walking around here. We occupy these spaces, but as individuals, we don't have mission statements for our life. If I walk up to you and ask you, what is the mission statement for your life? You ought to be able to answer that question. And so, if you're clear about what your mission statement is, when you get into a contestation with somebody else's mission statement or belief system that might be different than yours, you can hold your own. Right. You don't need to shut that person down or talk to the hand. You ain't got to do all that. You engage the conversation and you intellectually deconstruct their argument. So I don't think you have to tell people they can't come. Now, having said that, I don't believe in shutting down speech, but I also believe just as strongly in protest. So if you're going to have Ann Coulter here and students want to protest Ann Coulter, they can protest. They shouldn't try to shut down the conversation, but they can protest you. They can protest Ann Coulter because that is their democratic right. I believe in protest. The best of our tradition, right. Martin King and Malcolm, just don't get me started. The best of our tradition is A. Philip Randolph, is protest. And so I think you can hold two of those thoughts at the same time. You can believe in not shutting down speech, but also believe in the respectful right. Of people to civilly, and that's the key word. Yeah. That's, as you well know, the college president, that's what's wrong with our society, man. We just don't understand or appreciate the value of being engaged in civil dialogue. And so you don't shut it down, you deconstruct it, you protest it, but it can all be done civilly. I believe this, and I wrote this in one of these books, that and this is a tall order. And it's funny how, Dr. Kimbrough, when you write something and you talk about something for years, sometimes life has a way, God has a way of putting you in a situation where you get tested to believe your own stuff. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, Negro, you wrote this 20 years ago. Right. And you've been talking about it for 20 years. Do you believe it? Mm-hmm. Do you believe it? Mm-hmm. And what I've been saying for many, many years is that there's nothing in life that we ever have to say or do regarding another human being that we cannot find a way to say or do in love. That's a tall order, man. Right. That's a tall order. When you fire people, there's a way to do it respectfully. Yeah. I don't care when you divorce somebody, it ain't got to be War of the Roses. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in life that we ever have to do involving another human being that we cannot find a way to say or do in love. So you see why I say I'm being challenged by my own thesis. Because in a moment like this, where people are trying to publicly shame me, I have to find a way to respond, but to respond in love. Mm-hmm. To respond not by calling people names, not by cussing people out, just by saying, this is just not true. Right. This is not who I am. And I believe in the end that, Dr. King put it this way, the truth crushed to the earth will rise again. He loved that quote, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God in the shadow, keeping watch above his own. No lie can live forever. And so in a real way, the truth doesn't even need a defense. Mm-hmm. You just tell the truth. I say all the time to young people, your mission in life is to seek the truth. That's why you're here at Dillard. Yeah. You want to seek the truth, you want to speak the truth, you want to stand on the truth, and you want to stay with the truth. Seek it, speak it, stand on it, stay with it. If you do that, you're going to be all right.
Okay. So after you get through the tour, big picture, what's next for you? What all you got going on?
Good question. I finished this tour, and I'm going back to LA because we got a new show to start. And I can tell you, people's like, are you excited about it? I said, well, maybe I will be a little further down the road. It's a lot of work, man. I've done this a bunch of times in my career. Starting a new show is a lot of work. You got to get a new set design. You got to get new theme music. You get your staff rebooted. There's just so much to do. You got to start doing rehearsals. You got to get your logo design. What's your logo going to look like? There's just a lot of stuff to do before you get on the air. So we're hoping to start. We announced we'd start second quarter. I think that means early April. Okay. The show is called The Upside with Tavis Smiley. The Upside with Tavis Smiley. So I've been, a motivator of sorts throughout my career, but I'm excited about this new show, which allows me every week to do a series talking to people who have overcome all kinds of obstacles, people who are the epitome of resilience. And there are athletes who fit that bill. There are authors who fit that bill. There are politicians. There are entrepreneurs. There are everyday people who know what it's like to be able to overcome whatever obstacle life puts in front of you, to be resilient. Mm-hmm. And we need that. We need some positivity. We need stories of resilience. And so this show, The Upside with Tavis Smiley, is just about that, about how you live a life on the upside. How do you get to the upside of life? By being a resilient personality. And so this is a new series. It's an online series. So we announced these deals that are really a combination of things. It's an online series. So this new series will be, for the first time ever in my life, on Fire Stick, on Roku, on Xbox, on Apple TV. So we believe that by doing so, we're finally going to have an even younger audience with this new show, The Upside with Tavis Smiley. We're also doing it on cable. So for the old school folk who still like to see you on television, you can turn on the Word Network, and 4 times a week you can watch me on cable television. There's another company called Truly that we're also distributing our content through. And in all the years I've been doing this, man, I have never had an international distribution deal. I'm known all across the country, but never gone international. So part of this deal was an international distribution deal that allows me, one, to have this new show seen around the world. But not just the new show, but I've got a 3,000 plus show catalog of all the interviews I've done for PBS. So you think of all the people I've talked to, from presidents to entertainers to authors to world leaders and innovators, all these people, those interviews basically air one time because I got a different show every night. Mm-hmm. So you got this huge catalog that's worth a lot of money, and people around the world have never seen it. And so into this opportunity, into this crisis, steps a chance to have an international deal. So now we have to go through all that catalog, 3,000 plus shows, and pull out the shows that we think are good for international syndication. So my team is going to be busy when we get off the road. So I'm excited to be on this tour, but happy to be done with it in a few days to get back home, because to get on the air in April, there's a lot to be done. So that's the answer your question. I got a TV show to get on air.
Right, I got you.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, we want to thank you for just spending a little
Yeah,
time
please.
talking with us.
It's my great honor, sir.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doc.